Hello everyone and welcome to this video. My name is Arston and today we're going to talk about Python functions. Alright, so before we run any Python code, the first thing that we're going to do is we want to check if Python is installed in our local machine. So to be able to check, if you open up your Visual Studio Code, you can open your terminal. Just click on this button right here and then choose terminal. And here it shows you a shortcut key that you can use in the future. So in this case, let's type here python -- version. So if it returns to you a version number, just like on my case, my version number is Python 3.11.9, it means that Python is installed in my local machine. And if it doesn't return to you a version number, it might mean that you have to install Python and you have to visit their website, python.org/downloads. And in this page, it would show you the latest version of Python for your operating system. At the time of recording, the latest version is Python 3.12.4. So in the future, this might change, but you don't have to worry. All the codes that we're going to use for today will be working on the latest versions of Python. So once that is done, you can now install Python in your local machine, and then you can type python -- version again, and hopefully it returns to you a version number. If it doesn't, you may have to restart your Visual Studio Code and try again. There you go. So once that is done, you can now create a folder inside of your local machine. I created mine inside my desktop folder, and I named it python_functions. And then inside of that folder, I created python_functions.py. So .py is the file extension for Python. All right, let's now talk about functions. So functions is a reusable block of code that is designed to perform a specific task. So when you want to run the codes that is inside of a function, you want to call that function. Let's go ahead and create a function using the def keyword. This is short for define. And then next, you're going to pass here the name of the function that you want to create. I want to create a function that would greet the user. So I'm going to name this function greet. And then I'm going to pass here a colon. And if you press enter, you would see here that the next line of code is indented. It means that all of the next lines of code that we have here that is indented belongs to this function. So I'm going to type here print, and I'm just going to have hello right here. Then in a function, this is a block of code, meaning it's a group of code. So it is not limited to one line. We can make here 2 lines. And for this one, I'm going to say, welcome to the world of functions. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and run our Python file. And here you would see that it doesn't return to us anything. Why is that? The reason why is because when you create a function, it's just a function. It is ready. However, to be able to use the code that is inside of this function, you need to call the function. And for that, we're going to call its name. Okay, so to call the function, we're going to call the greet, then pass the parentheses and save it. So here, if you try to run the code, you would see here that we have hello, welcome to the world of functions. All right. And also, functions or the code inside of a function is reusable. So to be able to reuse this code that we have right here, we can try to call again the greet function multiple times. Let's say 3 times right here. And let's try to run this code again. You will see here that the code inside of the greet function is printed 3 times. So this is how functions are useful. Whenever you create a functionality and you want to run that functionality multiple times, you just need to call the function name. Okay. Oftentimes, when we have a greet function, we also want to greet a person. So what we often do is we create a variable that would store the name of the person, and then we want to concatenate. So let's try and do that. So the name variable, let's store here, let's say John Doe. Then we're going to say hello to John Doe. So we're going to concatenate here, call the name variable. Then let's add a space here. If we try to run this again, you will see here we have hello John Doe. However, one thing that we will notice is that whenever we try to run this again, we can still see John Doe. So what if we want to run the greet function, but we want to greet another person? How can we do that? Now to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to use what we call the concept of parameters. Let me try to remove this one for now. And parameters are like variables, or they work like variables, and oftentimes they are placeholders that belongs to a certain function. So here we have the greet function, and what we want to do is we want to create here a parameter, and we're going to name this parameter name, and this parameter works like a placeholder. So in the future it would also store a value. Let's say for example we have the name here. Let us try to remove it. And what we're going to do, whenever we call the greet function, we want to pass the argument or the data for the parameter name. So here I'm going to pass John Doe. All right, so here we said parameters are like variables. So variables can contain data, or they can also be like placeholders. In this case, we have the name. And when we pass the value, which is called the argument, so when we pass the value, this will now be the value for the name that we have right here. So what will happen is we're going to use John Doe. We have here hello John Doe. So let's try that out and run this code. You can see here hello John Doe. And one of the good things on this one is that we can pass here a different value. Let's say for example greet. Then let's pass here Jane Doe. So if we try to run this again, you can see we have John Doe. The second one, we have Jane Doe. So it means that you can pass any argument to the parameter that we have right here. This means that we're going to be able to reuse this function with different sets of arguments. All right. So that is what we call the parameters and arguments. Let us now see here. What if we want to create a function that would add two numbers together? So earlier, the function that we created, let me try to return this one right here. This function that we created is a function that performs a task. In this case, the task that it performs is it greets the user and also says, welcome to the world of functions. Also, we have what we call a function that calculates and returns a value. So let's try and do that here. Let me try to remove this and let's try to create another function. We're going to name this function sum. Then we're going to pass here a pair of parentheses. Here we want to add two numbers together. So we're going to create two parameters that would store the numbers. So num1 and then num2. Then we're going to pass here a colon, press enter, and it is indented. So here, what we want to do is we want to add num1 and the value for the num2. Also, we want to return this. After we get the answer or the sum, we want to return the sum. So we will add here what we call the return statement. So we have num1 plus num2, then return it. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the sum function. Then here, we're going to pass two arguments. So for the first parameter, we're going to pass 10 as the argument. Second parameter, we're going to pass 20. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to print this. So let's say print, and here, sum, then comma. All right, so let's try to run this. Click the run button. You can see that the sum of the two arguments that we passed, the 10 and 20, is 30. All right, so here we have a function that calculates and also returns a value. So earlier we have a function that does a certain task, that is to greet the user. So you may be wondering, what should be the better approach? In this case, if you are having to choose between the two approaches, you might want to choose the return, because here you are able to have a flexibility on where you're going to use the data that is returned. So in this case, what we did is we want to output or print out the data or the answer between num1 plus num2, and we want to add some here, so we can see that we are able to use the data afterward. However, in this case, we are tied to printing the data in our terminal. In the future, we may want to do something with the data, so we want to avoid just having to print it in our terminal, just like what we have right here. All right. Now, here we can see that we are trying to add two numbers together. And oftentimes in this case, we are adding 10 and 20, so the answer is 30. Even if you change the order, 20 and 10, if you save this, run it again, the answer is still 30 because addition have the commutative property. However, let's try to create a function for the difference. So we want to subtract difference, then we have num1 and num2. Here, going to return num1 minus num2. So let's try to call this function that we created. So difference, let's pass here 10 or maybe 20, then 10. Then let's try to print the difference. There you go. So if we try to run this, here you can see that the difference between the two numbers that we have is 10. However, for subtraction, we don't have the commutative property. Therefore, if we try to change this, let's say for example, 10 and 20, if we try to run this, we can see that the answer is now negative 10. It is different. So in this case, the order in which we pass the argument is important. So if you pass here 10, it would be the value for the num1. And if you pass here 20, we have the num2. So what if you want to change the order? You want to pass the value of 10, but you want it to be for the num2. And you want to pass the value of 20 last, and you want it to be for the num1. In that case, what you want to do is you want to use the keyword arguments. So the keyword arguments, what you're going to do is for this one, we're going to use this as the value of num2. So you're going to pass here the keyword argument num2 equals 10. And then the 20 here, we want to pass num1. That would be for 20. And here, even if the first argument that we pass, it is for the num2, and the last one would be for the num1. If we try to run this, as you can see, the answer now is 10. So that would be 20 minus 10, even if 10 comes here first. There you go. So that is what we call the keyword arguments. It makes our code cleaner because we now know which data is passed or which argument is passed to which parameter, even if the order is different. All right. So there are also certain scenarios wherein, let's say for example, we're going to create a function that would raise a number to a certain power. Let's say def, then raise to power, then parentheses, then here we're going to pass a colon, and on this one we're going to only add here, let's say pass. All right, so the pass here allows us to be able to create a function that doesn't do anything yet. So the function cannot be empty. So if you are going to construct a function, you can pass here, or you can add here pass, so that it will not give us any error yet. So in this case, we want to raise a certain number to a power. So we're going to add here the number parameter and then the power parameter. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add here, we're going to raise the number to a certain power. Then we're going to store the result into a variable result. And here we're going to print. We're going to use the formatted string. Then we're going to pass here curly braces, the number raised to the power of. Then here we're going to pass the power. Then colon. So we're going to add here the result. All right, so here we want to raise the number to a certain power. So what we're going to do is call raise to power function. Then for the first parameter, we're going to pass the argument of 2. Then for the second parameter, 3. There you go. So let's try to run this. We can see that 2 raised to the power of 3 is equal to 8. So one of the things that we will be able to notice here is that if we didn't pass a 3 here, we only pass one value that would be used for the number, but we didn't pass any value for the power. If we try to run this, you can see that it returns to us a type error. It says here that there is one missing required positional argument that would be for power. The reason why is because we didn't add an argument for the power parameter that we have right here. So how can we solve this? Let's say, for example, we only have the number, and what we want to do is maybe you want to add here a default. Whenever the user didn't pass the value for power, you want to use the default value. For that one, what you're going to do is here, we're going to add a default value, let's say the power of 2. So whenever the user didn't pass the value for the power and they pass a value for the number, we have here the number 2 raised to the power of 2. So if you run this, we can see that 2 raised to the power of 2 is equals to false. So that is what we call the default arguments. So if the user didn't pass a argument, you will use the default. All right. So let's move on to the next part of our topic, which will be about the args. So in this case, let's say, for example, you want to add a number of, or a couple of numbers. Let's say you don't know how many numbers you're going to add, but you want to add all of them. So let's try and create a function for that. So for that, we need to call the def keyword. Then going to name this sum of all numbers. Then we're going to pass a pair of parentheses and a semicolon. And in this case, what we want to do first is we want to pass here. Then let us try to call this function. So let's say sum of all numbers. And here, let's say, for example, we want to add multiple numbers. Let's say 5, then 9, 4, and 5. So here in this case, we are not currently sure how many numbers that the user will pass. We just want to add all of them. So if you are in this scenario, what we want to do is you want to use the args. So the args is short for arguments. So in this case, you don't know how many arguments the user will pass. So what this would do is all of the arguments that are passed would be packed into a tuple. So here we have multiple numbers. So we're going to name this numbers. All right, just for readability. Now what we want to do is here, let me try and remove this pass that we have right here. So we want to create a variable that would store the total. So set this to 0. Then here we're going to create a for loop. So for in, so for number in the numbers tuple we have. So what we want to do is for each of the number, we want to add it into the total. So total, then we're going to use the augmented assignment plus equals. So total plus equals number. Then after all of the iteration, we are able to add all of these numbers that we have here into the total. What we want to do is return the total. So it would return the total of all of the numbers that we passed. We want to print this out. So we're going to say print, and here we're going to say sum of all numbers, then comma. All right, so let's try this out. So if we run this code, we have here the sum of all numbers. That would be the value of 23 that we have right here. So if you have multiple arguments that is going to be passed, and you can store them into a tuple, so we want to pack them into a tuple by using the args. All right, so args is short for arguments. Let's move on to the next one. So what if the user is going to pass you multiple different keyword arguments? So how are you going to pack that? So for that one, what you're going to do is you're going to create a function def. Let's say, for example, the user would pass multiple keyword arguments. Let's say personal info. So let's add here display user info, then a pair of parentheses, then a colon. So for this one, let's add again pass. So let's call the display user info. Then here, let's imagine that the user would pass their name as the key value pair. So let's add here, let's say John Doe. Then they were going to add here, let's say their age, be 30. Then email, that would be johndoe.gmail.com. So in this case, what is passed here is keyword arguments. So what we want to do is we want to use the quarks, that is short for keyword arguments. So what this will do is it will pack this data that we have here into a dictionary. Then we can access that dictionary. Let's name this quarks into user data. There you go. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over each of the key value pair inside of the user data dictionary. So what we're going to do is you're going to use a for loop. So for key, then here, what we want to do is we want to also unpack the value. So we're going to use in, then access the user data dictionary. Then we're going to use here the method of dot items. So what this would do is it would return to us the key and the value. Then we unpacked it into both of this variable here. Then what we want to do is we want to print the key and the value pair. So we're going to add here a formatted string. Then we want to capitalize the key. So I'm going to add here curly braces and call the key. Then we can use the capitalize method here. Then here we're going to also call the value, the key value pair. So for this one, let us try to run this out. So run this code. Let me try to remove this first. All right, run this code. We can see here we have John Doe, and the key will be name, and it is capitalized, the first letter. Then we have age, 30, and the email is johndoe@gmail.com. So that is how you can handle when the user would pass multiple keyword arguments. You can use the double asterisk right here to pack them inside of a dictionary. Then in that dictionary, you can use the methods to be able to work with the data inside of that dictionary. So that will be all for our discussion for functions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you do, can you please add a reaction or maybe add a like to this YouTube video and then subscribe to the One Code Camp YouTube channel. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you on our next videos. Have a good day.